Welcome to the Design Vault, a show about the past, present, and future of design. The Design Vault is a conversation hosted by Albert Shum and Tamer Abanami, reflecting on iconic products and ideas from the past and rethinking them from new perspectives.
Welcome to the Design Vault. With me is Albert. Albert, how are you doing?
Good, Tamer. How are you doing?
I'm good. What are we talking about today?
Well, today we're going to talk about one of the more, I would say, iconic and classic industrial design products, and really the designer and some of their thinking on design and how it's impacted and influenced a lot of our products. So the product we're looking at is the Braun ET66 calculator, designed by Dieter Rams.
One of the greatest. This was a time, I think, where there were the rock star industrial designers who designed a bunch of products, right?
Yeah, but before that, I think this idea of industrial design is kind of the hero. But I do want to kind of dive into this product a bit more. I think it's one of those products where it speaks to both the nature of technology, but also, I think, how do you make something really human and approachable in some ways, also timeless. And the ET66 calculator, I think it was launched in 1987. And if you go back in 1987, like the 80s, it seems like calculator, like that would be the PC era, right? And why is the calculator still with us today? It's the design that actually influenced the Apple iPhone calculator. So a lot of people still use it today. And Braun is a company that probably a lot of people interact with today. But back then, Braun made a lot of different consumer electronics products. It was a German company. And Dieter Rams was head of the design department there. And he was the chief design officer. And this idea of, I think, having a designer that led one designer and who leads the entire department of design and all the products, it's something that I think a lot of designers saw that as like, oh, that's what a design leader is. And I think the calculator itself was so different than that era of calculators were. And when I say that era of calculator, if you go back and look at like the HP 15C, like these very technical calculators or Texas Instrument, they were so functions, so full of it was like pretty complex. Because it's almost like little programmable computers, whereas the Braun calculator was this very minimal aesthetics and only what you need, and really, for me, spoke to this kind of having clarity of what a design should be.
Yeah, I think the thing that comes through with Dieter Rams' designs is they're so reduced in their simplicity that if you just do one thing, like a color, or one thing like a placement, it really stands out and becomes, very, very much the identifiable thing about the gesture. So as we bring that up, what makes this calculator iconic?
Is not just my take. I think you could kind of go through, Dieter Rams famously publishes 10 principles of good design. And maybe we could kind of break down each of those and see how the product kind of reflects those principles. And the first principle is this, it seems kind of trite, is innovative. And for me, what makes this product innovative, if you look at the way the button layout and the colors, it wasn't widely used, these kind of very tactile, almost like, they look like Smarties buttons. Versus this very squarish, like all the calculators before was this very functional engineering devices.
Do you prefer M&Ms or Smarties? Because it sounds like you like Smarties.
Yeah,
but to the rest of the audience who doesn't know what Smarties, he means M&Ms.
Yeah, M&M. Sorry, I grew up in Canada. We had Smarties and not M&M. But yeah, like M&Ms, where even the colors, the dome shape, the buttons. I think the use of these muted tones of color. Rather than these harsh, bold colors. I think that to me, that's innovative and it makes it more approachable and more accessible. And I'm sure, I remember, Tamer, you probably forget all this. Remember working on the phone project, we would debate about, should your pictures show up in a circle or in a square?
Yes.
And the rounded corners.
Yes. Yes, much blood has been spilled over that debate.
Yeah, about rounded corners, and I think a lot of us designers, we really look at the details, and details do matter. And I think that's a nature of innovation. Doesn't have to be these big giant technological leap of like, oh wow, the LLM model is using transformer is going to like. I think that's how we look at technology today.
Yeah. I think what's interesting about the innovative principle is you can accomplish a lot of innovation through restraint, right? And there's a lot of restraint in that design. What do you think when you restrain a design like a calculator? Did it drive more innovation on materials? Did it drive what did it drive? Was it just innovative in its look, or was there more?
Yeah, it could be innovative in its construction. If you look at the ET66, it's very compact. It's very thin. There's no screws. The snap together housing. So I think those, like, again, we tend to assume technology has to be this kind of, especially digital, like it's about the Moore's law. That's what drives a lot of the innovation. Whereas I think in a product like the ET66, it's those small details and how it's built and how it's made can be innovative.
Yeah.
The next principle, and this one is hopefully everyone in the audience would agree, makes a product useful. I know that seems like the utility of a product. I think, like, remember that criteria we would talk about: useful, usable, and delightful, right? And useful part is it fulfills a need. It's something that
has to have utility.
Has utility, and it addresses this kind of customer need. And I think having this kind of simple, lightweight, compact calculator, for me, it's like it's perfect for travel. Like, you want to put it in your bag, you want something quickly accessible. It's not complicated. I don't have to read a manual. I just need something quickly. Maybe that's why it's in the iPhone now.
Yeah, I think
like everyone uses a calculator in the iPhone, just like, oh, well, how much should I tip?
Right. Right. Yeah, we've had discussions about that, Albert. I don't want to tell people what.
Yeah, when we go to lunch, it's a big issue for sure.
So if we go back to that for a second, do you think part of why it was useful is, a lot of calculators at that time, in those late 80s, mid 80s, had a lot of functions, an overload of functions, such that 99% of your use of a calculator has nothing to do with half of the stuff that's on that device. And it was like an extreme
You're not going to
statement.
talk about the Office ribbon now, are you?
Hey, I have a lot of love for the Office ribbon most of the time.
But some of I think this is a great point. I think this idea of owning what you need and reducing it down, and so much of technology product is about adding more features, more things, and I do like to think we're heading. Again, it's not about minimalism. I think sometimes we debate that, right? It's like, oh, let's just get rid of things, and you see the opposite of that.
No, it's restraint. It's a different.
Yeah, restraint, and then surfacing up things when you need it in that moment, and to me that's useful versus like overwhelming you with so many, like a calculator. Like, oh yeah, I'm sure we could add a graphing function to it. But how often would you graph on your calculator? Maybe when you're doing an exam.
Yeah, only when I took math classes.
Yeah, so I think the second criteria.
So then it gets us to the third principle, which is good design is aesthetic.
Yeah. I think it's beauty. Get back to that detail. How, like, the refinement to me is aesthetics, like the proportions, obviously, and grid and layout and the balance, but really this idea, it's the craft, and every detail all comes together, like that, the bezel around the display, even though you have a tiny display for a calculator, it's one line display, just having that attention to detail, that craft of like having that bezel, highlighting it and framing it in a way that's proportional to the rest of the device. So it's not just this tiny little window. And then you have this big area around it that doesn't really speak to it. Like, having that frame to me is really understanding proportions and understanding the visual hierarchy and then attention to those details. So that's to me aesthetics. It's that understanding how visual composition, I get, of all the different elements.
The ratios on the face of the Braun are quite interesting. I think, does it use a golden mean for the top versus the bottom?
I haven't checked it out. I'm sure there's some, if you look at the way it's broken up.
Or golden ratio,
the thirds, yeah. And where's the center, visual center, right? And how the display and even where the Braun logo goes on the face. I think that's what I mean by like all those proportions and balance, right? That's aesthetic. It's not about like, oh, it's a beautiful shape only, right?
So then I have a question for you that will lead us to the next principle. And there's this kind of very restrained color hierarchy and color use on the buttons. How does that make the calculator understandable?
Well, it's kind of interesting. They decided layout, the less we can use, like the percentage, square root, right? The delta, and then the cancel, clear all button. It's on the left column. I think that also kind of visually highlights like the main interaction is with the number buttons that's in the center. That's really balanced. Yeah, so I feel like that's a very rational layout and very clear.
And I think the next two principles go together really well, is unobtrusive and is honest. And I think if you want me to explain that, I think you just go look up the picture of the calculator. It is both those things. How do you see it, Albert?
Yeah, I do think, well, the unobtrusive one is, I think physical product and digital product, there is a big difference. And I think one of the aspects is when you're designing a tool like a calculator, it's obvious this is a physical product, right? And then when you go to the digital version on the iPhone, I think that's where there's a certain amount of space where personalization happens in digital products that you don't have in physical products as much. And when I say personalization, it's not like, oh, you can just change a color and add themes. Is like, how do you want to customize the experience to be you? And I think that's where I think good design sometimes fail, because some people want more density and some people want less. Right. in digital experiences.
Right.
And unobtrusive means they are neither decorative, it's not decorative, right? Like in this kind of design. Whereas I think sometimes, in digital products, you do want people to have that personalization, that do want it to be in their style and speaks to them. So I think this is an interesting one to kind of expand on and as we head into the digital era.
I think it's easier depending on the degree of utility and the type of use. Some things I think, even in the digital era, are best, you best serve the user by making it unobtrusive, because it's something you don't use often, but it's when you use it, it's critical, like the big red button that, shuts down everything. Sure. Or whatever. Yeah. But I hear you, because this is something I think we've seen in products we've worked on, where you can take a position where, this is the design and it's on a pedestal, and then you lock out the user. The user has needs. This is going to be part of their life.
Right. And that's the tension. That's a real big tension that we I think design teams struggle with. Like, hey, we believe this is good design, but it doesn't serve the customer, the end user's need to self-expression, let's say, or personalization, or make it their own. Which also ties into the second principle, or not the second, but the one that follows. Like, good design's honest and has a clarity of purpose. Well, I think with digital products, we're constantly updating and making it better, and learning what people might need, or the scenarios evolving. You could, and software, you can add features. You could literally add another button, literally, and on this calculator if we wanted to, and not have to like retool it and create a whole new model. And so you can tell people like, hey, we have these additional features. Actually, you want people to know that you've updated your product and it's added more value than before. So that's another principle that's kind of evolving. Again, I think it's really important to keep in mind, in the era when Rams was designing physical products, consumer electronics, I think this is a totally righteous principle.
Right.
It's just might not be as applicable in this new era. Whereas I probably change it from good designs honest to good designs. It's intentful, like the intention. There's clarity of intent, what it's trying to do.
Yeah. Good design is intentional.
Yeah, it's intentional. Yeah.
Just a sidebar on the Apple iPhone, the calculator originally was very heavily inspired by the ET66.
Yeah.
But they, a few years ago, changed it.
Right.
So if you look it up, you'll see, they still look related, but, you can go back in time and online and see what it was originally.
Does it have landscape mode now too? Or
I think it does have landscape mode. I think before it was really simple and following a lot of these guidelines. So then after we say is honest, the next principle is long lasting. And how do you break that down? Is it long lasting in the look and feel, long lasting in like it's durable? What does that mean?
Yeah. There's definitely a timelessness aspect to this principle that we should keep in mind. And again, back to physical products, like you want something that's not just a fad, isn't just go in and out, and it's because there's a high utility. And again, context is so important, right? This product was something like a calculator where you want it to be part of your home, your office, or when you travel. It should speak to its appropriateness in whatever context it's in. And it shouldn't be screaming at you saying like, please use me. I do think maybe this is more about the nature of how do you make something that really, it's not something that you just use once and throw it away. Maybe that's to me, it's the long lasting part. And we cover, there's a lot of products that we'll be covering that are still the same design that's been around for like 30 years because it's just works so well. And there's something really important about that. So this long lasting part.
On the long lasting side where you kind of say the design is timeless to some extent. Mm-hmm. I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with Dieter Rams' work and legacy, but if you aren't, look it up and look at all these things he and his team developed. A lot of what they've done has stood the test of time very well. I think SF MoMA had an exhibit many, many years ago on Dieter Rams. There's a famous book in hardcover that documents Dieter Rams' work.
There's a whole documentary by Gary Husett.
Yeah, and the documentary, definitely, we'll leave that in the show notes. Definitely worth looking at. There's something really hard about doing that, but it looks deceptively simple. So the next one down the road of these 10 principles is good design is thorough down to the last detail.
Yeah, and I kind of touched on that when we talked about aesthetics, and I think this one kind of similarly, I think because attention, God is in the details. I do think it's about the craft, and this is the part I want to bring up about craft. Sometimes we kind of forget, like to make products, it's hard. It takes so many iterations. There's just the idea of going from concept to development to manufacturing to delivering it to the end customer. Like in physical products, that's a long, long path. And there's so many things you have to consider. Just because you designed it and you have even a sketch or a 3D file and then you ship it off to engineering, that was the old school. You can't throw it across the wall. Well, to make engineering validation, like to get the draft angle right, to get all that precision of the material and to finish that texture just right on the face. I think that, to me, it's really about that last detail, that execution.
And then we get into the last two, and when we're done with them, we'll kind of restate them as a list. Good design is environmental friendly. That's how it's kind of stated by Dieter Rams.
Yeah, it's probably the current term today is it's sustainable and really ties into this idea of circular economy. You have to design for the whole life cycle, not just think about like, oh, wow, this is a beautiful design we got on the shelf or someone bought it and that's it. Like more of our thinking is where the materials come from, how do we manufacture it, what happens when a customer uses it, and what happens when they stop using it. That, to me, it's really important to kind of rethink that whole cycle of designing for the whole life cycle, which also leads to, I think, the next principle, as little as possible. Reduce, reduce, reduce. And there's a large business component to this too. Using less parts, less material, reduces the cost, reduces time to manufacturing. That simplicity, that I think that helps drive the utility value up. So I think these are great principles to kind of keep us grounded on our design work.
So if we're going to restate these 10 principles, just kind of, we meandered through them earlier. According to Dieter Rams, good design is innovative. That's 1. 2, it makes a product useful. 3, is aesthetic. 4, makes a product understandable. 5, is unobtrusive. 6, is honest. 7, is long-lasting. 8, is thorough down to the last detail. 9, is environmentally friendly. And 10, and this is, I think, if we could subtitle the episode, involves as little design as possible. And when you look at the Braun ET66, I think it does a really good job of exemplifying and realizing these principles. As do the products that Dieter Rams designed at Braun. How do you take these 10 and kind of abstract them to the world of digital and software and AI? Because a lot of this stuff holds for the most part. That's what I'm getting from the last 15 minutes.
Yeah, this is where I think, not going to sound very a bit bold, if I might. What's missing on these 10? Or what would I add?
Please.
What would I change? I know I'm going to get a lot of. That's why I try to be respectful. And again, this is just.
You're trying to be controversial right now. And I'll just for the listeners, this is Albert, not me, that's about to say this.
Yes. I think what's surprising for me is there's really not a mention of the end user in these principles. I think that my first principle always in any design project is end user is king, your customer is king. Like keeping user center, human center, like being center about back to like intentional. Like we're here creating products because we believe we can help empower our customers or make the products work better for our customers. I think having that principle, like customer is key, being customer obsessed. Good design is customer obsessed. Would be one principle I would say, especially in this digital era where when you design a product that gets made, like say this calculator in its first run in the 80s, 87, let's say they made 100,000, right? Or even 500,000, I'd be like, wow, that's a lot of calculators, right? Like for digital products, if iPhone calculator was only used by 100,000 people, like the Apple folks would be like, hey, what happened? Like, because they sell literally millions, right? Millions of iPhones, tens of millions. So the scale is so different. And you have to think about the impact of your customer, the things that you work on. So I do think that's probably one difference between this physical and digital products.
Let me argue the counterpoint here. I would say when I look at the principles lined up and I look at the products, I think implied in those is more than just, what you're adding. I would say that because the product has to be useful and understandable implies that the user is somewhere in that mix. But I'll go further and say it's not just about the end user as king. It's about all stakeholders in the product, right?
Right. Yeah.
As little design as possible makes it easier to engineer.
Yeah.
Environmentally friendly is good for the planet. So I would say it depends on how you slice it. I do agree that it's worthy for today, maybe, because there's a lot more designers and designing digital is a lot more complex in some ways or in different ways.
Oh,
calling these things out
complex.
Are very important, right?
Yeah, and calling it out and back to that intentionality, saying that is the highest order. Right. And I do agree that stakeholder framing is so important because it's not just the end users, the planet and the community. And you see the impact of a lot of digital experiences and not to sidetrack on social media and news and information, like the impact has long-term effects. So that's why it's so important to think about how our responsibility in how we create and what we create.
So now, we kind of are talking a little bit about this transition of how we assess this product in today's realm. There's a myth today, and that's the myth of the hero designer. And so I'd love to kind of see how you get your opinion on this myth and the contrast between the Braun ET66 and today.
Yeah, I think Dieter Rams in that era, back to like when you design, especially in industrial design. Again, this is not a critique of the design itself. I think it's what's changed. What's changed since that era is that digital experiences is such a large part of our lives. When I say digital, everything obviously from the web to mobile to how we experience, how we communicate, how we connect, how we listen to each other, what we listen to, how we consume information. Like this idea of we live in these digital ecosystems and the products around it and the services. That's so different than a singular product with a singular function. It is a calculator, where now on an iPhone, on any mobile phone, you can download as many calculators as you want. So,
yeah, or people who design platforms and systems and things that are even more complicated than a feature or a service.
That scale, that complexity, the myth of, and it is a myth, that one designer can do it all versus I've always had this framing that now our design, back to that ecosystem, is almost like you're more of a city planner. You're planning how the streets go and how do you get different neighborhoods to interact with each other. So you're thinking a lot more about creating these zones of opportunity for design teams to flourish. So as a leader, your job is to create the conditions and frame the design agenda, frame the purpose of your team, be intentional. Like, hey, we're going to create in this area an experience that allows people to collaborate and come together and communicate and get things done. In another area, we're going to allow people to come together and play games and explore whole new worlds. But they're related because it's part of the same ecosystem. So that's what I mean by you're more of a city planner as a design leader rather than the singular designer with a vision of how the world comes together and people will execute your idea.
Yeah, I think a lot of the projects that we got to work on were very large scale. And I think the analogy of design is a city. And there are various ways to design the city, from urban planning to architecture
it's an ecosystem,
to remodeling to murals that are painted on side of buildings. All these things are things that you can track to design activity and product development activity. But does this track also for a small thing? 3 people working on a startup. How do you think about that? Because I love that analogy, and it's been, I use it all the time for big stuff. Does it scale to the small stuff?
Yeah, I do think even if you're on a startup doing a 0 to 1, you have to think about your place in the ecosystem. Very seldom, very few products, like even if you create an app, like, oh, we're going to be on iOS or Android, right? There's only 2 platforms. And you have to think about like, oh, how does this relate to the experiences on those mobile platforms? And not only that, like you think about like payment. Well, someone needs to pay in our app, how do you integrate with that, or a banking system, or which sign on, sign off? Like you really have to think more about holistically how it interacts with other products and even other architectures than just saying like, hey, I'm going to design everything. My way. So.
It's kind of like the technical debate between custom controls and common controls. And somebody might show up with a bunch of arrogance saying, I'll just write everything myself. And then it just, you'll have to update the app every month.
You can't do that.
Everything breaks every time the OS updates. And so I think there's more self-awareness and humility with the approach of looking at the bigger picture and where you fit in and understanding where you want to take the risk or where you want to take the bet.
Yeah. So even a small 3-person team, you have to really be considerate. And
so you might be in somebody else's city and you need to figure out how you fit in.
And how to navigate that. And be cognizant that you have to help bring your customer, your end user along so that they don't feel like out of place. So
I was talking to some CS students the other day and kind of talking about this concept of You may not want to work in big tech if you're working on your startup already. That's great for you, but you cannot ignore these platforms and ecosystems because whatever you're going to launch will have to take those things into account. Yeah. And it goes the same not just for CS students, it goes the same for designers, right? Where is this going to manifest? How is it going to be perceived relative to the things around it? How is the customer going to engage with it? How are other stakeholders going to engage with it?
Yeah, and I do want to juxtapose like when I say this myth of hero designers, and I'm really framing that around digital experiences and ecosystem and large scale experiences. There are still hero designers in many areas, and this is not negative. I think in the world of fashion and design and art, if you look in the fashion world, and I worked at Nike, I think we had amazing designers that had very clear vision. They would design the entire product. You work with someone like Tinker Hatfield at Nike. He has a very clear, he would sketch it, and this is what his story, he would create a whole narrative around the product singularly and build that and design it. And so I would say there are areas of where you can still have that ability to manifest a vision and execute and design it and build it.
It is the exception, I believe. It is an important exception because a lot of these designers do move things forward. But when we talk about scale and we talk about big things continuing over time, it needs more than one.
Yeah, and you have. I think that's where you, as a designer, in creating products, you have to decide how you want to work and is it right for you. I think in tech and digital experiences, at least I find, if you're cognizant of that, you have a much higher chance of success versus approaching it like, oh, I'm the designer and here's my design, and engineering will just love it because I designed it. Like, well, I haven't seen that play out very well usually.
Neither have I. This has been fascinating. So I like how you kind of brought it back to this physical product, maybe more preponderance of design hero. Digital product, it becomes a little bit less frequent. It becomes more important to think about scale and how these different roles come together and these different components of design work together. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today. It was a good conversation. I enjoyed it.
Likewise. And look forward to the next episode.
Thanks everybody for listening, and we will catch you in the next episode. Take care.
See ya.
Thank you for listening. The Design Vault is brought to you by hosts Albert Shum and Thamer Abanami and is produced and edited by Romina Hakim, Tonio Telles, and Poonam Patel, with music by Red Lips Media, brand design by Rafael Poloni. Join the conversation on social media at the Design Vault Podcast on Instagram. The views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of any organizations they represent.